Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. Welcome back, I should say, because it is finally time again for F1 to pick back up after the very quiet summer break. Not a lot of things happening, and not a lot of things happening on this channel. I apologize for that. I was going to upload some FPL content, other F1 content, but I've just been way too busy and sometimes real life gets in the way. The deadline for the F1 fantasy game, why I can't even speak anymore because I've completely forgotten how F1 fantasy works, is in just 2 days time. So I thought we would discuss both where I'm sitting with my team, where you should be sitting with yours, and what we should do looking at the tail end of the season, how we can plan it out, all that good stuff. We're going to talk about the chips, we're going to talk about the drivers that you want, the drivers that you don't want, the team structures you want, the team structures you don't want. So sit around. You don't want to miss this. Before we get into that, though, I just want to say that, F1 is finally back. This channel is finally back. Content on this channel is back. And the deadline stream on this channel is back. And it will finally be from my own home. I can have a proper setup, proper things. We're going to do everything like we've done it before. We're going to take your questions, all of that good stuff. It's going to happen 2 hours before the deadline on Saturday. So put that into your calendar right now. You don't want to miss the deadline stream. That's where my team will finalize. So everything in this video will be mere speculations. We still need to look at FP1 and FP2 to see if we can glean any information from those. Have there been any upgrades, things of that nature. So do not miss the deadline stream this Saturday, 2 hours before the deadline, 2 hours before qualifying starts. I'll hope to see you all there, right here on this channel. You can also follow me on Twitter, where I will be reminding you of that fact. So follow me on Twitter, subscribe to the channel, notifications, all of that good stuff, so you don't miss the deadline stream on Saturday. Let's actually talk about the game, though. So I barely remember what my team was. I'm sure you don't remember what my team was when we left off after Spa. This was my team. I had a Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri team with Ferrari and Mercedes. Almost no money in the bank. 3 transfers available: Nico, Pierre Gasly, and Logan Sargent. The first thing I want to talk about is, the tail end of the season. There's only 10 races left. That doesn't sound that much, but it's almost half the season, right? We're 14 races in, we're 10 races to go. This is the point where you need to start looking at your team and go, what can I do with the budget I have gained throughout the season to get the most points possible? Because now, if you go for a budget building route here now in Zandvoort, in Monza, I think you're gonna be disappointed, because the little budget that there is to gain is not going to be enough to make up for the points you lost. So at this point, throw all budget building teams out the window. Now, okay, let's say Haas upgrades the car and is suddenly the third fastest team on the grid. We can start picking up Haas constructors, but you get what I'm saying, right? So we need to focus on points purely here. There's going to be less chat about what is budget available, but you need to look at what your budget is and the best team you can build at that budget. And looking at the tail end of the season, right, we have 10 races. And I sort of split these races into 3 sections. We have the first 4. That's Zandvoort, that's Monza, that's the Baku Grand Prix, and the Singapore Grand Prix, right? These 4, there's 2 in a row, 2 weekends in a row in Europe, 1 week break, and then 2 weekends in Asia. After that, there's a 3-week break, so almost like a fall break. It's as long as the summer break was, which is crazy. Between Singapore and COTA, the American Grand Prix. So we then have COTA, Mexico, Brazil, a triple header before we go into a 2-week break, heading into the final triple header of Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi, right? So these are sort of the 3 different sections. Now, between these large breaks, right, the 3-week break in September, October, and the 3-week break in November, or the 2-week break in November, there could be upgrades. Less so maybe at the end of the season, because but say it's still even at the top of the constructor standings, I can see upgrades drop in. So what I think is important is during these sort of off, in betweens of end of the season part 1. That's what we're in now. End of season, post summer break part 1, post summer break part 2. We have to think of better names. Still workshopping that, but we have to probably make sure we're flexible in between here, because say Red Bull bring an upgrade or something similar, you do want to be in a position where you can transfer your team over to a Red Bull focused or a McLaren focused team, depending on who is fastest, but after Singapore heading into Kota. So my plan initially, as someone who doesn't have the wild card, will be to try and keep 3 transfers available when we get to these large gaps. If you do have the wild card available, either now after the summer break, where we're expecting some upgrades to come, or for one of these larger breaks in the future heading into the tail end of the season, I think that's where it's the best to use your wild card. Remember though that Kota is a sprint race, so you might not want to use your wild card here if you want to use another chip there, such as the triple DRS or the no negative or things of that nature. So we're going to talk all the chips later, but we have to sort of structure these up. So for the first 4 races, right? Now, there are a couple of assets that I want to discuss, and why I want to discuss assets specific here, I did some of that discussion in my transfer plans video, which I posted at the beginning of the summer break after Spa, but I still want to do that now because I can talk a lot about how I would set up my team, but my budget is at 120.7 million. Yours might be different. So you have to look at your team, what your budget is, and what you can do with that money. I think the first asset to discuss is obviously George Russell. George Russell is now at 20.7 million, which is probably by far the best priced assets in the game for us strategists, right? You really, like, George Russell is a cheat code. He's so good for his costs, and I think he very much will be the way a lot of you can fit certain teams together. The certain teams I'm talking about is the 2B lineup, right? We've talked a lot about the single premium versus the 2 premium driver lineups. I think for the tail end of the season, you pretty much have to rock a 2 premium driver with a 2 premium constructor lineup. So I would prioritize getting that in any way, shape, or form. Yes, it's good if you can afford a Magnussen or a Hülkenberg, but if you can afford a George Russell and a Logan Sargent over like a Yuki Tsunoda and a Magnussen, you take George Russell and Logan Sargent every time, especially when we get to races such as Baku, where overtaking is not super easy, it's just pretty much on the long straights. Then you have Singapore, which is really hard for overtaking. You have Zandvoort, which is not that easy for overtaking. Yes, it was very easy last year, but that was because of the crazy weather. You have Monza, which is surprisingly difficult considering the track layout. So these races that are coming up are not going to be that good for C-tier assets, I don't think. So the difference between a Magnussen and a Logan Sargent is going to be less than what you gain from running someone like a George Russell. So I think the cheapest available good team that you can run is something like this, right? Okay, I put McLaren in there, but Ferrari. And then if you're really suffering from budget, even something like this only costs about 110 million, right? This team is good. This is not a bad team. You put the 2X on Oscar Piastri, you rock with George Russell as your second driver, you have Mercedes Ferrari, and then I think this is sort of the base team we should all be having. Why Oscar Piastri here? I just think McLaren are probably who we all expect to be fastest. I mean, this could be like a Carlos Sainz if you're even poorer than this. Or a Charles Leclerc, who's Charles Leclerc is the same price as Piastri, so it's only really Carlos Sainz that would make this any cheaper. So I'm gonna use this as sort of a baseline. I'm gonna put Oscar Piastri first because Oscar Piastri should be the 2X, and then from here on out, if you have this as your base team, this is like the base team, and then from here on out, depending on your team, you upgrade certain assets. For example, you can upgrade Oscar Piastri to a Lando Norris if you think Lando Norris is the best 2X option. You could upgrade it to a Max Verstappen if you think Max Verstappen is the best 2X option and you really want Max. You can keep Oscar Piastri and just upgrade Ferrari to a McLaren, for example, if McLaren look really strong. And then you can upgrade Shogun Yu to something like a Pierre Gasly is probably the cheap. Nico Hülkenberg is the cheapest good upgrade you can get to. Maybe an Alex Albon, you can stretch it. But here is where you have to start evaluating which upgrades matter. And that's what I have to do with my team too. I need to strip down my team to its basic core And the basic core is this. You have 2 good constructors, the cheapest ones, and you have 2 good drivers, 1 good for 2x, and then the 3 cheapest options available. This is the core. This should be the core of everyone's team, and then you have to figure out which upgrades are worth it, right? As for your C-tier drivers that you have right now, I would go so far as to say that you should focus on upgrade your B tiers and your constructors before you even think about the C-tier drivers. Maybe getting Hulkenberg, because he is cheap enough, is valuable from someone like a Guan Yu or a Bottas. But Mercedes, I think, is just better than Ferrari right now. Maybe that will differ from track to track. But considering Mercedes is cheaper too, I think Mercedes is pretty much a no-brainer. From here, you go for McLaren. Then you go for, the Lando Norris. You can go for, Piastri and Norris. And then I don't think I can do much here rather than just upgrade this to an Alex Albon. So you see what I've done with my budget. My budget managed to upgrade a George Russell to Lando Norris. I got McLaren in there, and I got Alex Albon in there, and then I ran out of budget. That's what you should be doing. I think what I just showed you is the base team, and then you should be upgrading assets based on what you think the priority is. Another important thing for everyone, right, is you're probably in mini leagues that you want to win. Or you're really, really at the top of the leaderboards fighting for a top finish in F1 Fantasy, right? I'm only at an overall ranking of like 15,000, but I really want to get to the 10K. So another thing that you can do is look at, okay, what are other people in my mini league or around my rank doing, and how can I be different from them by still gaining points? I think a great, fantastic asset to do that with, I should not have updated there, is Max Verstappen. So let's go back to this base team of Ferrari, Mercedes, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, and then some cheap assets. I think if you really want to stand out and be different from other players, now I can't do this from the George Russell, but I could see myself running something like this. Can I fit McLaren in here? Yeah. This looks pretty good to me. Especially if Max Verstappen gets back some form, starts winning. I think he's going to win in Zandvoort. He should be favorite for that, right? If you can fit this in, which I can just barely do, the problem with this team is that it requires too many transfers for me to do. It requires me 4 transfers to get to. Something like this could really, really be differential and could be the difference. And 2xing Max Verstappen can really allow you to get ahead. Now, again, if you're poorer than me, you just stick with Ferrari in here. I know running no McLaren is really scary, especially since everyone has it. This could definitely backfire. But if you're someone who really, really looking to chase rank, I think Max Verstappen is a fantastic option for it. However, I would not sacrifice the 2-2 structure, right? If you're that poor that you can't fit Max Verstappen with George Russell and with Ferrari Mercedes in here, say that you're at 117 million, I don't think it's worth having Max Verstappen. You shouldn't be running a Max Verstappen team with like Yuki, Gasly, Nico, Magnussen. I don't think this is good enough. I really, really don't. Let's even, do something like this where you have that and then you have like an Alex Albon in here, right? I don't think this is good enough. I think this is going to score less than the 2 premium driver lineup. So Max Verstappen, a fantastic option that I am considering. I just don't know if it's right for my team at the moment, but it's definitely one to wait and see. If we look at FP1 and FP2 and it looks like Max is clearly the best, I might just go for a Max Verstappen team. However, I would not sacrifice a 2-2 structure to bring Max Verstappen in. So let's look at some chips then. Okay, so these chips are for my second sort of experimental team, right? But these are my chips for my main team. I've used 3 of them. Let's talk about them and when I think you should use them, because I think some of you might be sitting with all of them, or at least like my second team, be sitting with 5 of them available, only having used the Limitless. I definitely know a couple of people where that is the case. So let's go through these remaining 10 races. Remember, 10 races, you can only use 1 chip per race. So if you're sitting with 5 chips, you need to use a chip every other race. So Let's talk about when I think you should use every available chip if you still The first chip I want to talk about is the extra DRS, the 3X, the triple X, whatever you want to call it. I think that's the chip that most of us still have remaining. I know very few people who've already used it. If you have, that's fine, skip to the next section. But if you still have the 3X, I think you should be using it in a sprint race. I feel like that's pretty obvious. I've said that this entire year, and it's never changed. The 3 sprint races remaining are Austin, Sao Paulo, and Lusail. Which one do I think you should use it in? I think it depends. I think it's very, very valid to use it in any 3 of them. In any of the 3. I think it more so depends on what other chips you have remaining. But I think you have to use it in one of these 3 races. I think it's probably later on where you might be able to afford Max Verstappen plus Lando Norris, or if you see a race where you think one team is going to dominate, say McLaren looks by far the fastest car, say we get to Kota and McLaren just looks like they're completely flying, no one else is even close, I think that's when you go for the 3X, when you know which 2 drivers are the best to pick. Or if you are so rich that you can afford Max Verstappen and Lando Norris with a 2 double team, right? What is really good with the sprints is that you can, of course, as we've been able to for the entirety of the season, you can watch the sprint qualifying before making your decision, as the deadline is not until the sprint race on the Saturday. This means that you can watch the qualifying, see that McLaren are a second faster than everyone else, and then go for the extra DRS. Which is also another reason why I think we need to be really, really flexible with our transfers. Remember how I said that you need to keep 3 transfers available when we get to Kota because we have a 3-week break beforehand? Well, this is the exact reason why. If you have 3 transfers available, you can much more easily move to a team. Say, it could even be Mercedes. Say Mercedes look the fastest, and suddenly you want both Hamilton and Russell on your team. Well, if you have 3 transfers available, you can almost certainly get to that and then use the 3X, right? So what I think you should do with the 3X is have it in mind that you could use it in Austin, you could use it in Sao Paulo, you could use it in Lusail, right? So you look at Austin, you're prepared to use the extra DRS in Austin. If it doesn't look like it's right for your team, if you can't get to the 2 best drivers for Austin, you save it and use it in the next one. And that might cause you to rethink and change your mind about another chip. Because say you have the no negative left, right? The no negative, which I've been advocating should be used in a sprint race this entire season. I think the no negative, if you still have it, is really, really good in something like Brazil. If you want to use it in a single game week, it's probably Singapore, but I personally think it's far better to use it in a sprint race because there's 2 races, almost, twice the chance to crash. Why is it twice the chance to, or crash DNF, right? Twice the chance of DNFing. Well, most DNFs that aren't mechanical happen in the start, and there are 2 starts in the sprint weekend, so there's just more chances to DNF. Hence why you should use a no negative in a sprint race. I think Sao Paulo, if it rains there, which it has definitely done a few times, I think Sao Paulo is probably the best sprint race to use. I know we're talking about the no negative right now, but it sort of blends in with the extra DRS. If you're planning to use the no negative in Brazil, be ready to switch it to the extra DRS. Right? I think the extra DRS is more important to use in a sprint weekend than it is to use a no negative, because the no negative could end up netting you absolutely 0 points. If you don't get any negative scores, the no negative is useless. The no negative is useless if you have no negatives, right? So the extra DRS is way more important, so you should prioritize the extra DRS, and that's why I'm talking about it first. Look at Austin, look at the qualifying. Can I get a good team together to use the extra DRS? If yes, use it. If no, wait for Brazil, check there. If no again, use it in Qatar. So you might sort of end up defaulting it to it being Qatar, and at that point you just have to do the best you can do with it. But plan to use it in Austin. If it doesn't look like it will work for your specific team, or if it's really, really hard to tell who's better, suddenly Leclerc could pop up with a win, you have no idea, then don't use it because you're going to lose out on points. You really want it to be in a race where you think you can nail the 2 best drivers, especially if they're from the same team, such as a McLaren race, right? I'm mentioning McLaren because I think that's the most likely. If Red Bull looked dominant, I still wouldn't trust Checo with it. So it's mostly for a McLaren pick. So that's the extra DRS. Let's move on to the no negative and properly talk about it. For the no negative, I think there's only 4 options out of the 10 available. I think you either use it in one of the 3 sprints or you use it in Singapore. And the only reason I would say you use it in Singapore, because remember, Singapore comes before all of these sprint races. The only way I would use it in Singapore is if you have so many chips left available that you're running out of sprints to use it. Say you have Limitless, you have the extra DRS, you have the Autopilot chip, you have all of these chips available to you, then you might want to consider using the no negative in Singapore. Other than that, I think if you still have the no negative, it should pretty much be a lock in Brazil. Granted, you keep an eye on your 3x, and if the 3x looks good there, you go for that, and then you just no negative in Qatar and call it a day. Qatar, you no negative in Qatar and call it a day. So I think the no negative is relatively simple. You use it in a sprint or use it in Singapore, but only in Singapore if you have so many if you have so many chips left available. Now the Limitless is very, very interesting for a few reasons. One, I don't think a lot of people have this remaining, but if you do, you have something really, really exciting you can do. I think a lot of us messed up by using the Limitless in Miami, but the Limitless is also stronger in earlier on in the season when we have cheaper teams, worse teams, and can't fit all these big hitters in. So if you have your Limitless still available, I think you're already almost you've already missed the opportunity to use it early on to gain an advantage on other players that way. So you have to use it another way. Some might argue that you should use your Limitless in a strong single game week. Listen to me talk FPL. A strong single race weekend, such as Singapore, such as Azerbaijan, such as Mexico. And yes, they look really good on paper, but you've just automatically lost out to people who used it in Hungary or used it in China or things of that nature. So what I think you should do is save it for last. Abu Dhabi itself is not a bad weekend to use the Limitless. Is it the best? Probably no. It's a single game, it's a single race week, so it's not that bad, single race weekend. But it's late on in the season, so people will have as strong a team as they're going to get for all the season. But the powerful thing by using it in Abu Dhabi, or not using it in Abu Dhabi, but saving it until Abu Dhabi, is that it allows you to scout all of the sprint races. Remember, we just talked about it, you can look at the qualifying. And the math and the data says that a single race weekend is better for the Limitless because I've made an entire video about that, right? But it is really, really good in a sprint weekend if the assets that you want, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, right? If they underperform in the sprint qualifying so they can get overtakes in the sprint qualifying. That's what happened in China. That's why the Limitless was so powerful in China. And the amazing thing with these sprint weekends is that you can scout them. So if you still have your Limitless, you should plan to use the Limitless or the Triple X if you also have that in every sprint race that's left, right? Let's just go back to the extra DRS. You have these, you have Austin, you have Sao Paulo, and you have Qatar, right? Plan to use them there. If it doesn't look like it's gonna work out, if Max is on pole, then you have Lando, then you have Oscar, then you have Lewis, then you have Russell, right? If you have those top five, you don't use the Limitless. You might want to go for the extra DRS if it looks like McLaren's doing it, but you don't use the Limitless. Then you just wait for next week, and then you wait for next week. And if it doesn't work out, if none of the sprint races that are coming up give you a good sprint qualifying to use the Limitless, you just use it in Abu Dhabi because there's no other chip that you would want to use in Abu Dhabi other than maybe the Autopilot. So I think that's what, if you have your Limitless, I think that's what you do. You scout it for every sprint, and if the sprints don't work out, you just use it in Abu Dhabi, and it's not that bad, right? I think in terms of how single race weeks go, Abu Dhabi is not the best, but not the worst. It's definitely worse than something like Mexico. Mexico, I think, could be a really good single race weekend, right, to use the Limitless. But the problem with Mexico is that it comes before other sprints, right? It's before it's before Brazil, right? Or is it after? Yeah, I think it's Cota, then Mexico, then Brazil. So it's before Brazil and it's before Qatar. So you can't scout them. So I think that's what you do if you have your Limitless. You save it for last. You don't actually save it for last. You wait for each of the sprint weekends. Have a Limitless as your priority. If something crazy happens in qualifying, then you use it to bring in those top 5 assets that you want, those top 5 drivers that you want. So that's what I would do with the Limitless chip. Let's move on to the next chip. So I briefly mentioned the wildcard earlier, but let's just go through that again. The wildcard, I think, if you still have it, is really, really good in those in-between sessions, right? The in-between sections of the final end of the season. That being, well, right now in Zandvoort, if you're running a single A team and want to switch it to a 2B lineup, I think now is the perfect time to do it with the wildcard. You can also use it either in Cota. Now I know that's a sprint race, so you might want to, a sprint weekend, so you might want to save it there, or in Las Vegas, but that might be a bit too late. There are other options you could do. You could use it. You can pretty much use the wildcard at any point if you feel like it's good for your team, but that's the key. It's very, very team specific. I think it's powerful to use and have available at the end of those, month-long breaks, 3-week breaks that we have coming up. But again, if your team looks fine now and then looks really, really bad because another team has suddenly emerged to be really, really strong, say Ferrari suddenly look to be the fastest in Singapore again, you might want to use it in Singapore. So I know I put Zandvoort and both the Americas here, but that's not really a guide. For the wildcard, it's strictly up to what you want. It could also be something where multiple drivers are taking engine penalties or similar, say in Monza. Then maybe you would want to use it there to get rid of those drivers or add those drivers if you want. Say something like a Magnussen or a Ocon, one of those C-tier drivers that you don't really want to change that much, that you might want to have for one race where they've taken a penalty. They have the option or the opportunity rather to overtake a bunch. Say Gasly back or Ocon that happened earlier in the season. Say something like that were to happen again. Yuki Tsunoda, for example, and you might have to downgrade. Say you're sitting with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, and to afford to upgrade to a Magnussen or to a Yuki or to a Ricciardo, one of those more expensive C-tier assets, you might have to downgrade Norris to then afford to upgrade Gasly. Downgrade Norris to Russell to afford the upgrade and things of that nature. So that's where wildcards could be really, really powerful. And that's sort of where the wildcard's at. It's a very, very difficult chip to use or difficult chip to give tips on because it varies greatly. But I would say either use it after one of those breaks where it looks like there might be a shift, or use it in any race weekend coming up where you want to make more transfers. It really is that simple and that difficult at the same time. Now, for the same reason why you should use the no negative in sprints or Singapore, the Autopilot applies. From this point onward, you should be having 2 premium drivers in your team, which technically gives you a reason to use the Autopilot every single weekend, right? The Autopilot, in my opinion, is the weakest chip available, so it's not massively important. You could use it whenever, really, but the biggest gain, the biggest upside you could get from an Autopilot is when one of your premium drivers performs way better than the other one. And that is more likely to happen. The difference between your 2 premium drivers, because you're always looking to get the number 1 and number 2 premium drivers, right? The biggest, differences that can happen is when there are multiple races where one of them DNFs, or in Singapore where there's a high DNF rate. So The autopilot chip, I think it depends on how many chips you have available. If you're sitting with 5, you might be good to just use it in Singapore if you're not planning on using any other chips there, just in case something happens there. And then if not, if you're running low on chips and you only have a couple available, consider using it in a sprint where one of your drivers might be DNFing or something might upset or yada yada, right? So autopilot, similar rules for the no negative, only less powerful. So in terms of the sort of value category, the autopilot is definitely below the no negative. So I think if you have to prioritize, say you have both the no negative and the autopilot remaining, I think you use the no negative in a sprint and autopilot in Singapore, because I think the no negative is just that much stronger in the sprint races. So the autopilot is definitely the least important chip you have. It's very likely, it's basically a 50-50 unless you're super mega rich and it's a 33% chance if you manage to fit 3 premium drivers in your team. The autopilot is essentially a 50-50 chance of being useless, and even when it is useful and you've picked the wrong 2x driver, the odds of them outscoring them your other driver by that much is not that high unless something drastic like a DNF happen, and those DNFs are more likely to happen in sprints or Singapore. So the autopilot, same rules as no negative, only less important. Let's talk about the final chip. Now the evil final fix chip there. I don't know when you should use the final fix. The final fix is one of those chips that you want to save it for a good opportunity, but that opportunity might not come. And there have been options previously where you could have used your final fix and it's ended up being good, it's ended up being bad. So with the final fix, I don't know. But what I do know is that when I see a good opportunity to use the final fix, I will not keep it secret. I will tell you guys. So I'm going to use this final fix section to remind you to subscribe so you don't miss a video, because when that final fix opportunity comes out, I'm going to be posting it on Twitter, I'm going to be posting it on YouTube, and it's going to be with a short time limit, right? Because you don't know if the final fix is good until after qualifying, and you have to use it before the race. So it's shorter than a 24-hour window where you can see the video, get the tip, and then actually use the chip. So if you still have the final fix, the best tip is to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss it when that magical final fix opportunity finally reveals itself. So that was the rather long but important section of the video where we talked about the chips remaining. Let's actually digest what all of the things that I've said and apply them to my team. So I showed you guys the baseline before. This is the team I'm rocking right now, 0.1 million in the bank. I have no way of getting Max Verstappen on a final fix, but I have Lando Norris, so there are definitely final fixable opportunities coming up. What do I want to do in Sandford? Well, getting Max Verstappen in is a problem. I don't really know that I can do it, right? I have 3 transfers, but that would require me to severely downgrade, and I don't even think I can afford it with... I can just barely afford this, right? So that would mean going McLaren-less, which I'm not that excited about. This is really the only way which I can get Max Verstappen in 3 transfers, because I can't downgrade any of my constructors. If you're sitting on a McLaren, then maybe that could be an option. So if Max Verstappen looks super dominant, and McLaren is not clearly faster than Mercedes or Red Bull, and it could really end up being a McLaren-less podium again, then I could maybe go for something like this and just completely bet against McLaren. Not very likely though. I think I still want to back McLaren. The question is how? And I think one of the main reasons is to get McLaren the constructor back in, right? When thinking about a constructor, think about what points they give you, right? They give you the points that are exclusive to the constructor, such as, X amount of drivers reaching Q3, also final pit stops, and similar. And what they also get is just all the points a driver gets that's not driver of the day. So in terms of Oscar Piastri, yes, if he wins, yes, if he gets second behind Max Verstappen, he could get driver of the day. Oscar Piastri is a very popular driver. He could definitely end up getting driver of the day. But other than that, you get most of the points from Piastri and Lando through the McLaren constructor. So what you can do, or what I could do rather, is get McLaren in for Ferrari, which I think is an upgrade Ferrari still look to be the 4th fastest team. We'll see if those upgrades start working for them. Again, awaiting free practice. But I could upgrade Ferrari to McLaren and then fit George Russell in there. A simple switch, 2 moves, that saves 3 transfers. I'm flexible in the future. I have Lando Norris, so in case Oscar Piastri puts it on pole after the qualifying in Zandvoort, I can final fix it in. Because then I would expect if Oscar Piastri puts it on pole in Zandvoort, I would expect Oscar Piastri to go and win the race and get driver of the day. That would be a really good final fix because he would be on the DRS boosted slot. So I like this. It's a very likely move for me to make. While I think Piastri is really, really good, the problem with Piastri is I can't afford the McLaren constructor, so I'm stuck with the Ferrari constructor. Another way I could afford that move is, say I want to stick with McLaren and I want to go for triple McLaren, is to downgrade another C-tier asset. And I did say before that you should prioritize your constructors and your good drivers. I can actually afford this with Zhou Guanyu in there. Now, I do think Zhou Guanyu is probably the worst C-tier in the game. But as long as he doesn't DNF, I don't care. He's getting 0. If he gets 0 points, I'm happy. So this could be an option if McLaren looks super dominant after FP1 and FP2. And I wouldn't be mad about running this team at all. It would again only be 2 transfers, meaning I save a transfer, meaning I'm flexible in the future. I still have Lando Norris. I can I have final fixable options everywhere apart from with Max Verstappen. And those are really the transfers I'm looking at right now. Now, while those are the moves I'm looking at, there are other things that could happen. For example, we know that Ferrari are bringing an upgrade to Zandvoort. Maybe then I don't want to get rid of Ferrari. Maybe then I even want to get another Ferrari driver in there, should they look really, really good. And I can definitely afford that, right? Leclerc and Piastri are the same price. This would still be Gasly then. So I can just stick with Ferrari, get Leclerc in for a single transfer, call it a day. So I have options there as well. The reason why I'm not discussing upgrades further is that, one, we don't know how they will perform, and 2, we don't know all of them yet. There could be other teams bringing upgrades. Maybe Haas are bringing an upgrade and I really, really, really want to get Magnussen in there. The problem with upgrading my seaters is that right now my seaters are very, very unflexible. And what I mean by that is that it's quite difficult for me to afford anything. The way I would upgrade a C-tier driver right now would be to get Russell in instead of Piastri, and then do the upgrade like this, and then keep Ferrari in there. Again, it is an option, but I prefer upgrading my good drivers and my constructors if they look like to get the most points. Yes, Magnussen is obviously better than Pierre Gasly. Magnussen is obviously better, but the difference between Magnussen and Gasly is not that big compared to like a Ferrari to a McLaren, if Ferrari still look to be the 4th fastest and McLaren look to be the fastest, right? The upgrade of Ferrari to McLaren is preferred over the upgrade of Gasly to Magnussen, simply for the reason that the points difference is greater, and I don't care about budget gains anymore. So it all depends on what happens at free practice 1 and 2, how those upgrades look for Ferrari and other teams that are bringing upgrades, how dominant McLaren look. All of that we'll wait and see, and I will discuss all the upgrades and how those upgrades look in my deadline stream. Again, another plug for the deadline stream on Saturday, 2 hours before qualifying. This channel, don't miss it. That's it for this video. Please comment your team. What are your plans? Did you even remember what your team looked like before going into the app and checking after this long of a break? Thank you all for being back. Thank you all for supporting me. And I'll see you on the deadline stream. Do not miss it. Bye.